I walked by my family's gathering. They asked if I wanted seconds. The roast was still warm. I can still see that moment with absolute clarity. It was a Saturday afternoon in late September, and I remember because the sun was hitting the street at that particular angle that makes everything look golden, the kind of afternoon that usually feels like a gift. I was walking through my neighborhood, heading back from the grocery store with a bag of vegetables in each hand, when I heard it. That distinct sound of laughter and conversation that you recognize instantly because you've heard it 1,000 times before. Your family's laughter. Your family's voices. That unmistakable cadence that belongs to the people who are supposed to know you best in this world. I stopped walking. Just stopped completely, right there on the sidewalk with the grocery bags digging into my palms. The sound was coming from the direction of my brother David's house, the big colonial at the corner of Maple and 5th Street, the one with the wraparound porch and the mature oak trees in the front. The house where so many family moments were supposed to happen. I could hear them through the open windows and doors. I could hear my mother's laugh, that distinctive sound she makes when she's truly enjoying herself. I could hear my sisters' voices layered on top of each other, the way they always do when they get going. I could hear my brother-in-law's deeper voice, and then this made my heart do something strange. I could hear children's voices too. My nieces and nephews. All of them. All together. And I realized in that moment, standing there with grocery bags cutting off my circulation, that I hadn't been invited to whatever was happening. I had no idea there was a gathering. I had no idea that my family was together. I thought about my calendar sitting on my kitchen counter at home, empty on this particular Saturday. I thought about the text messages I hadn't received. I thought about how my mother usually called me at least 3 times a week, and how she had called me just yesterday, and how she had said absolutely nothing about today's plans. My first instinct was to keep walking, to pretend I hadn't heard them, to walk past that house and go home and put my groceries away and continue with the day I'd planned, which had involved watching a movie and maybe reading the book I'd started last week. But something in me resisted that instinct. Something in me wanted to understand. Something in me wanted to look. I don't know if it was curiosity or pain or some combination of both, but I found myself turning toward the house instead of away from it. As I walked up to the driveway, I could see through the side gate into the backyard where they'd set up. There was a long table with a white tablecloth. There were flowers, pale blue hydrangeas I think, in the center. There were bottles of wine, some half empty, some barely touched. And there was food. There was a roast on the cutting board, golden brown and perfect, clearly just carved. There were sides I recognized from decades of family meals. The sweet potato dish with marshmallows, the green bean casserole with crispy onions, the salad with the special dressing that my sister Rebecca makes from a recipe she won't share with anyone. There was a pie on the dessert table. And they were all there, every single one of them, laughing and talking and living a moment that I was never told existed. I must have made a sound. Or maybe they just sensed my presence the way families sometimes can. But suddenly the conversation stopped. The laughter died down. And all of them turned toward me at once, my mother, my father, David, Rebecca, my brother Michael, their spouses, my nieces and nephews. All of them, with their forks in their hands and their mouths half open, frozen in that moment of realization. My mother recovered first. That's always been her strength and in some ways her greatest weakness, her ability to recover quickly from uncomfortable moments and smooth things over as though they never happened. She stood up from the table, her napkin falling to her lap, and her face did something complicated. It shifted from shock to something that might have been guilt, then to a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Evelyn," she said brightly. "Hi, honey. We were having a little family lunch. A spontaneous thing. Nothing formal. Nothing formal." That phrase hung in the air between us like a challenge. Nothing formal meant it wasn't important enough to invite me to. Nothing formal meant it was just the real family, the ones who actually counted. I stood there still holding my grocery bags and I looked at the roast. The roast was still warm. I could see the steam rising from where David had cut into it. I could smell it from where I was standing. Rosemary and garlic and something else that my mother had always used in her recipes. I could see that there was easily enough food for 15 people, maybe more. And they were acting as though I had somehow appeared from nowhere. My father cleared his throat. He's a quiet man, my father, not one for making scenes or expressing strong emotions. He typically lets my mother handle most of the family dynamics. But even he looked uncomfortable. He looked the way you look when you've been caught doing something you knew was wrong. We didn't, David started to say, but his wife put her hand on his arm to stop him. Rebecca stood up. Rebecca is 2 years younger than me, and we've always had a complicated relationship, close in some ways, competitive in others. She looked embarrassed, which I appreciated actually. At least someone was uncomfortable. Evelyn, it was really last minute. Your mom called us yesterday evening and said maybe we could get together for lunch today. And she trailed off, looking at my mother with what seemed like accusation in her eyes. That was when I understood. That was when I really understood. My mother had called Rebecca. My mother had called David and Michael and probably half the neighborhood. My mother had organized this gathering. My mother had made the choice to exclude me specifically. It wasn't an oversight. It wasn't an accident. It was a deliberate decision. I stood there with my groceries, looking at my family arranged around that table like a photograph from a magazine spread about perfect family moments, and something shifted inside me. It wasn't anger, not exactly. It was colder than anger. It was clarity. The roast smells good, I said quietly. My voice sounded strange to my own ears, steady, almost pleasant, but with something underneath it that made my mother's smile fade completely. It looks like you have plenty. My mother stood up fully now, her hands gesturing in that way she does when she's trying to manage a situation. Evelyn, we can get you a plate. We have plenty of food. You want to sit down? David, move over. Make room for your sister. Seconds. She was offering me seconds. That was what it came down to. I wasn't important enough to invite, but I was visible enough to feel guilty about, so I could have the leftovers. I could have the food that had already been eaten from, the meal that was already half finished. I could join in after everyone else had had their fill. I set my grocery bags down on the nearest chair. Thank you, I said, and I meant it, but not in the way she thought. That's very generous. But I have other plans. I turned and walked back toward the street. I could hear them calling after me, but I didn't turn around. I didn't look back. I picked up my groceries and I continued walking down the sidewalk, past the house with the oak trees and the perfect gathering, back toward my own home with my own walls and my own quiet. That walk home was the most important walk I've ever taken. Though I didn't fully understand it yet. I didn't understand that what I had just witnessed, what I was processing with every step, was the culmination of years of patterns. I didn't understand that this moment was going to change something fundamental in how I moved through my relationship with my family. I didn't understand that the quiet decision I was beginning to make in that moment would echo through the rest of my life. But I was about to find out. To understand why that moment on the street hit so hard, you need to understand who I am. Or rather, who I thought I was. My name is Evelyn Margaret Walsh, and I'm 63 years old. I've lived my entire life believing that I was the glue that held my family together. Not metaphorically, literally. I was the person who organized the gatherings. I was the person who called everyone to make sure they were coming. I was the person who spent 3 days before every holiday preparing food and cleaning, and making sure everything was perfect. I was the person who remembered birthdays before Facebook could remind anyone. I was the person who drove to the hospital when my father had his minor heart surgery. I was the person who sat with my mother when she was going through menopause and nobody knew how to talk to her about it. I was the person who watched my sister's kids when she needed to go back to work. I was the person who always showed up. And I loved that role. I'm not going to pretend I didn't. There's something deeply satisfying about being the person who makes things happen, who brings people together, who keeps the family functioning. For most of my life, I thought that was what love looked like. I thought that was what family meant. You sacrifice for each other. You put their needs first. You show up for them over and over and over until they understand that they matter to you. Until they understand that you do anything for them. My father, Charles, was a high school history teacher for 40 years. He was a good teacher, the kind that students remembered decades later and thanked him for. He was quiet, thoughtful, and deeply committed to his work. He was also largely absent from many family decisions, which meant that the emotional labor fell to my mother. My mother, Patricia, is a force of nature. She's 79 now, and she still has the energy of someone half her age. She was a nurse before she retired, And that nursing mentality infected everything she did, the rescuing, the helping, the organizing of chaos. She was warm and generous, and also, I realize now, something else. Something I didn't have a word for until much later. I grew up as the oldest of 4 children. David is 3 years younger than me. Rebecca is 2 years younger than David. Michael is 5 years younger than Rebecca. So there's almost a decade between me and Michael. I was the bridge between my mother's generation and my siblings' generation. I helped raise them in many ways. I changed diapers, helped with homework, stayed up late talking to Rebecca about her first heartbreak, taught Michael how to tie his shoes. By the time they all became teenagers, I had already internalized the role of caretaker. I graduated from college with a degree in accounting. It wasn't glamorous, but it was steady work, and it meant I could take care of myself financially. I was good at it too. I worked my way up through a series of jobs until I became a senior accountant at a mid-size firm in the city. It was meaningful work. I had people who reported to me. I had clients who specifically requested me because they trusted my expertise. I was good at organizing chaos and making sense of numbers. But the accounting job never felt as important as what I did for my family. That sounds crazy when I say it now, but it's true. I would work all week, and then I'd come home and spend my weekends doing things for my family. I went to every single one of my nieces' and nephews' school events. I bought thoughtful birthday gifts, even when I didn't have much money. I helped David with the down payment on his house when his credit wasn't great. I co-signed Michael's college loans. I listened to Rebecca talk for hours about her various personal dramas. I showed up. Always. Without fail. My own life wasn't particularly full. I had coworkers I was friendly with but no close friends. I dated occasionally but nothing ever went anywhere. I joined a yoga class once, but I quit because I didn't want to miss my mother's book club, which I attended even though I didn't always read the book. I was so busy being available for my family that I never quite got around to building a life that was fully mine. And I was okay with that, or at least I told myself I was. I told myself that this was what love meant. I told myself that the sacrifice was worth it. My mother would call me regularly. She still does, though the content of those calls has changed considerably since last September. She would call me to ask me to bring something to a family dinner. She would call me to talk through issues with my siblings. She would call me to coordinate things. Those phone calls were the rhythm of my life. I organized my schedule around them. I made sure I was available. I made sure I answered. But looking back now, I see the pattern more clearly. I see that I was the person who was always called upon to fix things, not because I was the most capable but because I was the most available. I was the person my family knew would rearrange their life if asked. I was reliable. I was dependable. And in some way I'm still trying to understand. I think my family had decided that reliability and dependability meant I was inexhaustible. It meant I didn't need things the way they did. It meant I could always give more. It meant that if they didn't invite me to something, it wouldn't hurt me the way it would hurt someone else because I was the one who was supposed to be strong. Looking back even further, I can see small moments that should have been signals. 3 years ago, my mother had a birthday party. I didn't organize it that year because I was dealing with a major project at work and a health issue I was managing quietly. My mother was turning 76. I assumed David or Rebecca would step in, would organize something the way I always did. Instead, my mother called me 3 days before her birthday and sounded hurt that nobody had done anything. I immediately stopped work, called everyone, and pulled together a party. I made her favorite dessert. I ordered catering. I made sure it was perfect. But I remember thinking at the time, even then, that something felt off about it. I remember thinking that I had been replaced as the person who made things happen, not because someone else had stepped up, but because I was expected to always step back in when things weren't working. 2 years ago, my brother Michael got married. It was a beautiful wedding. I helped plan most of it because his fiancée's parents lived far away. I chose the flowers. I helped with the seating arrangements. I made sure everything ran smoothly on the day. In the reception, when they thanked people, they thanked everyone who helped make this day possible. They didn't name me specifically. They named Michael's future in-laws. They named Rebecca for helping with some details. I sat there in my seat, having spent hundreds of hours on that wedding, and I wasn't named. I remember feeling something then too. A small sting. But I pushed it down. I told myself it didn't matter. I told myself that the important thing was that Michael was happy. Last year, my father had a significant health scare. It wasn't the minor one I mentioned earlier, that was just a warning sign. Last year, he had a serious infection that required hospitalization and intensive treatment. I took 2 weeks off work and stayed at the hospital with my mother. I drove them to appointments. I researched treatment options. I was there every step of the way. David called occasionally to check in. Rebecca sent flowers. Michael sent a card. My mother was grateful for my presence, but it was a different kind of gratitude, the kind you give to someone who is doing their job. "Thank you for being here, Evelyn," she would say. Not "I'm so grateful to have you," but "thank you for being here." As though I was an employee doing what I was paid to do. But I didn't think about it that way at the time. I thought I was being a good daughter. I thought I was being a good sister. I thought I was the kind of person who showed up when it mattered. I didn't realize that showing up consistently without recognition had a cost. I didn't realize that I was teaching my family that my presence wasn't special, that my effort wasn't valuable, that I was the kind of person who could be counted on but not necessarily cherished. That Saturday in September, when I walked past that house with the white tablecloth and the hydrangeas and the warm roast, everything crystallized. It wasn't just that I hadn't been invited to a lunch. It was that I had spent my entire life making sure my family felt included, felt loved, felt important, and they had never once done the same for me. It was that I had positioned myself as the person who gave, and they had accepted that arrangement completely. It was that I was only visible when I was needed, and when I wasn't needed, when they could have a gathering without me, they simply didn't see me at all. Walking home that day with my groceries, I was 43 years old. No, wait. 43 years of being invisible while being relied upon. 43 years of sacrifice that had been accepted as normal. 43 years of thinking that this was what family was supposed to be. But it was about to be 43 years of something ending, though I didn't know it yet. The next few hours after I got home were strange. I remember I put the groceries away mechanically, the vegetables in the crisper drawer, the yogurt in the fridge, the bread in the bread box. I remember the apartment felt very quiet. I remember I sat down on the couch and I thought about calling someone. Maybe one of my colleagues from work. Maybe my mother. But I didn't. I just sat there with the television on but muted, watching the screen without seeing what was on it. My phone rang around 6 in the evening. It was Rebecca. "Hi, Evelyn," she said. And her voice had that tone it gets when she's been rehearsing something. "I just wanted to check in. How are you doing?" How was I doing? That was an interesting question. How was I doing after showing up at a family gathering I wasn't invited to? How was I doing after the realization that my family had decided to get together without telling me? How was I doing after standing there in my groceries and being offered leftovers like I was an afterthought? "I'm fine," I said. And I was fine. I was something else too, but fine was a good place to start. "About this afternoon," Rebecca said, and I could hear the apology in her voice even before she said the words. "I want you to know that I thought you should have been invited. I told Mom that." "Did you?" I said. It wasn't a question exactly. "Yes." I said, "Mom, we should ask Evelyn too." And she said it was just a spontaneous thing and she'd already called people and she didn't want to make it awkward. Didn't want to make it awkward. Let me sit with that for a moment. My mother was concerned about making things awkward, so instead of inviting her oldest daughter, she just didn't. Instead of picking up the phone and saying, "Hey Evelyn, we're having lunch at David's, come join us," she just excluded me and hoped I wouldn't find out. And when I did find out, when I literally walked right past it, she offered me seconds. "Rebecca," I said slowly, "did you consider just inviting me? Without asking Mom? Did you consider calling me?" There was a pause. I could hear her breathing on the other end of the line. Well, no, I guess I didn't. I assumed Mom had a reason. I assumed you were busy, maybe. Of course she assumed that. Of course everyone assumed that I was busy. Because I was the person who had always positioned herself as busy, always making herself available but always seeming like I was juggling 1,000 things. It was a narrative I had created and reinforced through years of behavior. "Rebecca," I said, "I want to tell you something, and I want you to listen without interrupting." "Okay," she said, and I could hear the wariness in her voice. "I just realized something today. I spent my entire life making sure that you and Michael and David and Mom and Dad all felt loved and included. I organized gatherings. I showed up to events. I remembered birthdays. I helped with problems. And I did it because I love all of you. But I just realized that I did it so much and so consistently that it stopped being a gift. It started being an expectation. It started being something that everyone just assumed I would do, without ever asking if I wanted to be included in things. Without ever asking if I might want to be the one who was being taken care of. Rebecca was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Evelyn, that's not fair. We do care about you." "I know you care about me," I said. "But caring and including are two different things. And I'm realizing now that I've been fine with being cared for from a distance, as long as I was the one organizing everything. As long as I was the one making sure things happened. But I don't think I want that anymore." "What do you mean?" Rebecca asked, and there was something uncertain in her voice now. Something that suggested she was beginning to understand that this was bigger than just a missed lunch invitation. "I mean," I said carefully, "that I need some time to think about things, to figure out what I want my relationship with this family to look like. And I can't do that if I'm too busy taking care of everyone else." I hung up after that, but not in an angry way. It was quiet. It was gentle. But it was absolute. That phone call was the beginning of what I now think of as the after. There was a before, the time when I organized everything and made everything happen and positioned myself as the person who kept the family functioning. And then there was the after, the time when I started to understand that there might be other options. The next morning my mother called. She had probably debriefed with Rebecca and decided that she needed to handle this. My mother is good at damage control. "Evelyn, honey," she said. And her voice had that particular warm tone that I now recognized as the tone she used when she was trying to smooth something over. "I feel terrible about yesterday. I should have called you. It was thoughtless." "Yes," I said. "It was." My mother seemed taken aback by my directness. She was expecting me to reassure her, probably. She was expecting me to say, "Oh Mom, it's fine, don't worry about it, it's not a big deal." But I wasn't going to do that anymore. "I want to apologize," she continued. "And I want to make it up to you. How about you come over for dinner this week? I'll make your favorite things. We can have a nice family meal." A nice family meal. As though what I needed was to be offered seconds at my mother's table. As though what I needed was to be soothed and made to feel special through food and attention. "Mom," I said, "I need to ask you something, and I need you to answer me honestly." "Of course, honey. Why wasn't I invited yesterday? Was it truly spontaneous, or did you make a deliberate choice to leave me out?" There was a pause. And in that pause, I could feel the moment that my mother decided whether to be honest with me, or to continue the narrative we'd been operating under. "It wasn't entirely spontaneous," she said finally. Her voice was smaller now. "David called yesterday and said Rebecca and Michael wanted to get together. And I thought it would be nice to have a family lunch. I called some people and..." She stopped. "And you didn't call me," I finished. I suppose I was thinking that you probably had plans. That you were probably busy with something." There it was. There was the assumption that had been driving my entire family dynamic. I was the person who had plans. I was the person who was busy. I was the person who didn't need to be invited because I was always on the periphery anyway. Ready to help but not really part of the core group that mattered. "Mom," I said slowly, "I want you to know that I'm going to be making some changes." "Changes?" she asked, and I could hear the alarm in her voice. "What kind of changes?" "Changes in how available I am," I said. "Changes in how much energy I put into organizing family things. Changes in what I expect from my relationships with all of you." "Evelyn, you're not making sense. Is something wrong? Are you okay? Should I be worried?" That's when I realized that my mother couldn't see what was happening. She couldn't see that her oldest daughter had just spent 43 years in a family dynamic that wasn't working, and that I was finally starting to recognize it. She couldn't see that what I was describing wasn't a crisis, it was a boundary. She had never had to think about boundaries before because I had never insisted on having any. "I'm fine, Mom," I said. "I'm actually better than I've been in a long time. I just need some time to myself. Some space to figure things out." "For how long?" she asked, and there was something almost desperate in her voice, as though she was already imagining what it would be like if I wasn't available at her beck and call. "I don't know," I said. "I'll let you know." And then I hung up. The weight of what I had just done started to settle on me as soon as I ended the call. I had just stepped away from the role I'd been playing for my entire life. I had just said no to my mother. I had just created uncertainty in the family dynamic. And I knew that this was going to have consequences. But I also knew something else. I knew that if I didn't do this now, I would spend the rest of my life as the person at the edge of the table, being offered seconds from food I wasn't invited to the table to enjoy in the first place. The first week of my separation from family was strange. I didn't go to my mother's house. I didn't answer my phone immediately when my mother called. I didn't coordinate anything. And what I found was that my family didn't know what to do without me. David called on Wednesday asking if I could watch his kids on Friday because his wife had a work event. I said no. I didn't say no, I'm sorry I can't, the way I would have before. I just said, no, I can't help with that. Why not? He asked, and he sounded genuinely confused, as though I had just refused to do something completely unreasonable. Because I need some time for myself, I said. But it's just a few hours, he said. David, I can't help you with this right now. My mother called again on Thursday. There was definitely tension in her voice now. Evelyn, I'm starting to get worried about you. This isn't like you. First Rebecca said you were talking about making changes, and now David says you wouldn't watch the kids. What is going on? Nothing is going on, I said. I'm just taking some time to step back from being available all the time. For how long? Because I need to know what to expect. I need to know if you're going to be there for the family. And there it was. There was the real question. The real fear. Not are you okay? Or do you need anything? But are you going to still be available to do all the things I expect you to do? Mom, I need to go, I said. I'll call you when I'm ready to talk about this. I didn't call her back for 2 weeks. During those 2 weeks, something shifted in me. The initial shock of the lunch I wasn't invited to began to transform into something else. Transformed into clarity. It transformed into anger, but not the hot kind, the cold kind. The kind that comes from understanding a pattern and deciding that you're not going to participate in it anymore. I used that time alone to think about my life. I thought about the fact that I was 63 years old and I didn't have a partner. I thought about the fact that most of my friendships were surface level because I'd never invested in them properly. I thought about the fact that my apartment was modest and my life was quiet, and that I had positioned all of that as fine because my family was where I invested my emotional energy. I thought about what I actually wanted instead of what I thought I was supposed to want. And I came to some realizations. I realized that I had been using my family as an excuse to avoid doing the harder work of building a life for myself. I realized that by positioning myself as the person who gave and supported and was always available, I had made it nearly impossible for anyone to see me as someone who needed or wanted things. I realized that my family wasn't bad. They weren't cruel or deliberately hurtful. They had simply accepted the role I had given myself, and they had adjusted their expectations accordingly. But none of that mattered, really. What mattered was that I was done playing that role. What mattered was that I was going to start expecting something different from my relationships, whether my family was willing to adjust or not. 2.5 weeks after I hung up on my mother, she showed up at my apartment. Not called first. Not texted. Just showed up, stood outside my door, and rang the bell. When I opened the door, she looked smaller than I remembered her looking. She looked older. She looked worried. "We need to talk," she said. I let her in. We sat in my living room, and she told me that David and Rebecca and Michael had all called her expressing concern. She told me that everyone was worried that I was having some kind of emotional crisis. She told me that she had been crying on and off for days because she didn't understand what she had done wrong. She told me that I was making everyone very uncomfortable by withdrawing like this. "Mom," I said quietly, "I'm not withdrawing because I'm upset. I'm stepping back because I need to make some changes in how I relate to this family." "What kind of changes?" she asked, and she leaned forward as though if she could just understand she could fix it. "I need to start saying no," I said. "I need to stop organizing everything. I need to stop being available all the time. I need to build a life that isn't entirely centered around making sure everyone else is okay." My mother looked at me for a long moment, and then she said something that I wasn't expecting. "Is this about the lunch?" she asked. "It's partly about the lunch," I said. "But it's not just about the lunch. It's about a lifetime of being the person who gives and supports and shows up, And it's become clear to me that my presence is only valued when it's useful. When I'm not useful, when I'm not organizing things or fixing problems, I'm not included. My mother's eyes filled with tears. That's not fair, she said. Isn't it? I asked. When was the last time anyone called me just to see how I was? When was the last time anyone asked me if I wanted to do something, rather than asking me to do something for them? When was the last time I was the one who was cared for instead of the one doing the caring? My mother didn't have an answer to that. She sat there in my living room and she cried. And I sat there too, and I felt sad for her because I could see that she was beginning to understand what her oldest daughter was telling her, and she didn't know how to respond to it. I'm sorry, she said finally. I'm sorry that I made you feel like you weren't important. I'm sorry that I didn't include you. I'm sorry that. She stopped and she looked at me. I'm sorry. I don't know how else to say it. And I believed her. But I also knew that an apology wasn't going to change the fundamental pattern that had been established between us. I accept your apology, I said. But I need you to understand that things have to change. I can't go back to the way things were. I can't be the person who is always available. I can't be the person who makes everything happen. I need to find out who I am when I'm not doing those things. My mother left my apartment that evening, and she didn't look any more certain about the future than she had looked when she arrived. But something had shifted between us. The conversation had been honest. It had been necessary. And as soon as she left, I made a decision. I was going to make this real. I was going to make this visible. I was going to make sure that my family understood that this wasn't just about me taking a break. This was about building a new kind of relationship with them, one that was built on mutuality rather than my endless availability. For the first time in my life, I was going to put myself first. October arrived, and with it came the pressure of the holiday season. The holidays had always been my domain. I organized Thanksgiving. I organized Christmas. I made sure that every family member knew what they were supposed to bring, what time they were supposed to arrive, what the plans were. I created the rhythm that everyone else danced to. And in mid-October, my mother called and asked what I wanted to do for Thanksgiving. For the first time in 43 years, I didn't have a plan. I don't know, I said. I haven't thought about it. Well, I suppose we should start planning, she said. You'll want to come to the house like always, and we should figure out what everyone is bringing. Mom, I said. I'm not organizing Thanksgiving this year. There was a pause. What do you mean? I mean that I'm not going to be the one planning it. If you want to have Thanksgiving, you'll need to organize it. But Evelyn, my mother said, and I could hear the distress in her voice, I don't know how to do all that. It's so much work. Yes, I said. Yes, it is. That's what I've been doing for 4 decades. And I'm not doing it anymore. So you're not coming to Thanksgiving? She asked, and she sounded devastated. I didn't say that, I said. I said I'm not organizing it. If you want me to come, you'll need to invite me. You'll need to organize it. And it will be whatever you make it to be. My mother didn't know what to say to that. She hung up after a few more uncomfortable moments, and I knew that I had just put her in a position where she had to actually do the work that I had been doing. The next week, Rebecca called. Have you talked to Mom about Thanksgiving? She asked. I told her I'm not organizing it, I said. Okay, but who's going to organize it if you don't? I don't know, I said. Mom, I suppose. Or the family. Or nobody. But it's not going to be me. Rebecca sounded stunned. But you always organize it. Yes, I said. And I'm not going to anymore. I could feel Rebecca trying to understand this, trying to figure out how to navigate this new reality where I wasn't the person taking care of everything. So what do you want us to do? She asked finally. I want you to figure it out, I said. I want you to all talk to each other and figure out what Thanksgiving is going to look like without me organizing it. And if you want me to be there, you'll let me know. You'll invite me. And I'll decide if I want to come. This was a radical shift in my family dynamic, and I knew it. I was no longer the person to whom everything defaulted. I was no longer the person who could be relied upon to make things work. I was no longer the invisible force that held everything together. The first week of November, my mother called me back. We've decided to do Thanksgiving at our house, she said. David is bringing a ham. Rebecca is making sides. Michael is bringing wine. We'd like it if you would come. There was something different about the way she said it. There was an invitation in her words rather than an assumption. There was an acknowledgement that my presence was something they wanted, rather than something they expected. What time? I asked. 2:00, she said. I'll be there, I said. And I was. I showed up on Thanksgiving Day at 2:00, and I brought a pie that I made myself, not from obligation but because I wanted to. And when I walked into my parents' house, I could see that Thanksgiving looked different this year. It was more chaotic. The timing was off. The food wasn't as perfectly organized as it had always been, but something about it felt more genuine to me. My mother hugged me at the door, and she held on longer than usual. I'm so glad you're here, she said, and I believed her. Dinner was quieter than it usually was. There were awkward moments. There were conversations that didn't quite flow the way they normally did. But there was also something else. There was a kind of care in the way people looked at me. There was an attentiveness that suggested that my presence mattered in a different way than it had before. Michael asked me about my work and he listened when I answered. Rebecca asked me if I had been doing anything for myself lately, and she seemed genuinely interested in the answer. David thanked me for coming and said he knew it had been weird lately, and he appreciated me working through it with the family. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't the Thanksgiving I would have designed if I had been organizing it. But it was real in a way that my curated Thanksgivings had never been. As I was leaving to go home that evening, my mother walked me to the door. I've been thinking about what you said, she told me. About how I haven't been checking in on you, asking how you're doing. I want to change that. I want to be a better mother. I hugged her. And I meant it. I could see that she was trying. I could see that her apology was genuine. And even if she couldn't completely transform the patterns that had been established between us, I could see that she was making an effort. I appreciate that, I said. I'm going to be making an effort too. To be different. To expect different things. The winter after that turned around Thanksgiving was transformative for me, though not in the ways I might have expected. I didn't suddenly become a social butterfly or discover some hidden passion that I had been suppressing. I didn't quit my job or move to a new city or undergo some dramatic life transformation. What I did instead was small but in many ways more profound. I started keeping lunch dates with my colleague Sarah, a woman I had worked with for 5 years and barely knew. We started meeting every Thursday at noon, and we started actually talking about our lives. Sarah was struggling with her own family dynamics, and I found that as I talked about mine, I was able to see them more clearly. I was able to articulate what I had been feeling in a way that made sense not just to me but to someone outside the situation. I joined a book club, not my mother's but a different one that met at the library on Tuesday evenings. I started reading books that I actually wanted to read, not books I was supposed to read to fit in. I met other women who were interested in ideas and conversation, and I discovered that I enjoyed that kind of intellectual engagement. I started taking a yoga class again, the one I had quit years ago, and I actually enjoyed it. I went every Wednesday and I didn't feel guilty about it. I didn't feel like I was taking time away from family. I felt like I was taking time for myself, which was something I had never really done before. I also started dating again, or rather, I started being open to the possibility of dating. I had a friend set me up with a man named Robert who was a retired librarian. We went to dinner, and I discovered that I enjoyed his company. We went out again. And then again. It was nothing dramatic or life-changing, but it was something I had never allowed myself to explore because I was too busy organizing family events. The changes in my family became more apparent as the winter progressed. My mother started calling me just to talk, not to ask me to do things. She asked me about my job, about my new friends, about Robert. She asked because she was interested, not because she needed something from me. It was a small change, but it was significant. David started inviting me to things that weren't centered around his needs. He asked if I wanted to go to a basketball game with him and Michael. He asked if I wanted to have dinner with him and his wife without the kids. He was making an effort to spend time with me for me, rather than for what I could do for him. Rebecca and I had a conversation in December where she acknowledged that she had probably relied on me too much over the years, asking me to listen to her problems without asking what was going on in my own life. I'm sorry about that, she said. I'm going to try to be a better sister. A more balanced sister. Michael sent me a birthday card. My birthday is in November, and he had never sent me a card before in my entire life. Inside he wrote, "Thank you for always being there. I'm sorry I didn't always appreciate it. I hope you're doing things for yourself now. You deserve to be happy." These weren't huge dramatic shifts. Nobody had a sudden revelation that changed everything. But what I recognized was that the boundary I had set, the quiet storm I had created by simply stepping back, had forced my family to engage with me differently. And once they started engaging with me differently, the relationship started to change. By January, a full 3 months after I walked past that house with the warm roast, I had built something new. Not just with my family but with myself. I had given myself permission to want things, to need things, to expect things from the people who loved me. And I was teaching my family to provide those things. The moment that really cemented everything happened in early February. My mother called me on a Tuesday morning, which wasn't unusual. She had started calling me a couple of times a week just to chat. But this call was different. "Evelyn," she said, "I want to ask you something, and I want you to tell me honestly if you don't want to do it." "Okay," I said. "Your father and I have been talking, and we would like to have everyone over for Sunday dinner. Nothing formal. Just a family meal. And we'd like you to be there. Not to organize it or plan it or help with anything. Just to be there. To spend time with us." I felt something settle in my chest when she said that. Something that had been restless for months finally found its place. "I would like that," I said. "And Evelyn," my mother said, "if you want, maybe you could bring Robert. We'd like to meet him." That Sunday, I brought Robert to my parents' house. My mother answered the door, and she hugged me first like I was the one she was most excited to see. Then she introduced herself to Robert and welcomed him in. We sat around the table and my family was there, all of them. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't thinking about whether the food was perfectly plated, or whether everyone's needs were being met, or whether I was organized enough to hold everything together. I was just there. I was just present. I was just one member of the family among others, valued not for what I did but for who I was. Halfway through dinner, my father cleared his throat. This was unusual. My father rarely speaks in large family gatherings, but he did that night. "I want to say something," he said, and everyone stopped eating and looked at him. "Evelyn has made some changes this year. And I think it's important to acknowledge what she did. She realized that she had been giving too much of herself to this family, and instead of just continuing to do that, she made a change. She set a boundary. And I think that took a lot of courage, and I think all of us are better for it." My mother reached over and squeezed my hand. She taught us that we need to show up for each other, not just expect her to show up for us. She taught us that love isn't just about sacrifice. It's about presence and attention and actually seeing each other. And I'm grateful for that lesson. There wasn't a dry eye at that table. Even Robert looked moved, and he barely knew my family. "Thank you, Evelyn," my father said simply, "for being brave enough to ask for something different." I looked around the table at all of them. At my mother, who had learned to check in on me. At David, who had stopped assuming I would rearrange my life for him. At Rebecca, who had become more thoughtful about giving rather than just taking. At Michael, who had sent me a birthday card without being asked. And I understood that the quiet storm I had created by walking away from that lunch, I wasn't invited to, had done something important. It had forced all of us to look at the dynamics that had been operating underneath everything. It had forced all of us to ask different questions about what we wanted from each other. I didn't suddenly become someone entirely different. I'm still the kind of person who likes to help. I'm still thoughtful about others' needs. But I'm no longer the kind of person who sacrifices herself completely in the process of helping. I'm someone who has learned that boundaries aren't selfish. They're necessary. The rest of that winter and into spring was a period of real change. I continued dating Robert, and that relationship deepened. I continued my Thursday lunches with Sarah, and we became real friends. I continued my Tuesday book club, and I discovered that I had opinions about literature that were worth sharing. And I had a different kind of relationship with my family. It wasn't perfect. There were still moments where I felt the old patterns trying to reassert themselves. There was still the occasional phone call where my mother asked me to do something, and I had to consciously remember to say no if it didn't feel right. But the overall texture of my family relationships had changed. In March, my mother did something that really struck me. She organized a birthday party for me. She didn't ask me to help with anything. She didn't ask me what I wanted. She just took care of it. She decorated my parents' house. She ordered catering. She invited my close friends, Sarah, Robert, some other people I had gotten to know. She invited my siblings. She made a playlist. She baked a cake herself, and it wasn't perfect, but it was made with her own hands. When I walked in, I was honestly surprised. I hadn't expected anything like it. I had spent so many years making sure that other people felt celebrated that I had almost forgotten what it felt like to be the one being celebrated. "I wanted you to know that we see you," my mother said when she handed me a glass of wine. "I wanted you to know that your presence matters. Not because of what you do, but because of who you are." I cried that night. Not sad tears. Happy tears. Grateful tears. That party was the moment when I fully understood the impact of what I had done by drawing that boundary. I understood that it had given my family permission to love me differently. It had given them permission to see me as someone who was worth taking care of, not just as the person who takes care of others. As I'm reflecting on all of this now, months later, I'm struck by how much has changed since that September afternoon when I walked past my family's gathering. The woman who stood outside that house, holding grocery bags and being offered leftovers, feels like someone from a different lifetime. She felt invisible. She felt like she was perpetually on the outside of the moments that mattered. She felt like her worth was entirely tied to what she could provide for others. I'm not entirely that person anymore. I haven't transformed into someone completely different, but I have become someone more whole. Someone who knows that her presence is valuable, even when she isn't organizing something. Someone who can say no without guilt. Someone who can accept love without earning it through sacrifice. The changes extended beyond my family, too. At work, I realized that I had been taking on extra responsibilities that weren't technically my job because I was the person who could be relied on to do them. I started delegating. I started saying no to projects that didn't align with my actual job description. I recommended someone else for a promotion that I had been positioning myself for without really wanting it. And you know what? The world didn't fall apart. My company continued to function. Things got done. Just not all by me. In my friendship with Sarah, I became someone who could actually receive support instead of just providing it. When Sarah was going through a difficult time with her own family, I was there for her. But I also let her be there for me. I shared my vulnerabilities. I let her care about me. It made our friendship so much deeper than it would have been if I had just been the strong one all the time. With Robert, I allowed myself to be vulnerable in a way I had never been with anyone before. I told him about my family situation. I told him about the ways I had struggled. And instead of that pushing him away, it actually brought us closer. He became someone who understood me, not just someone who appreciated what I could do for him. Looking back, I understand that the moment when I saw that for sale sign turning into a metaphorical moment in my story wasn't about my family being bad or mean. It was about me finally seeing a pattern that I had been part of creating and maintaining for my entire adult life. It was about me realizing that I had made myself indispensable, and that had inadvertently made me invisible. The quiet storm I created by stepping back didn't destroy anything. It didn't create damage that couldn't be repaired. What it did was create the space for something different to emerge. It created the possibility for more honest relationships. It created the opportunity for my family to see me and value me for who I am, not just for what I do. I still organize family gatherings sometimes, but now it's a choice, not an obligation. I'm invited to be part of the planning, not just expected to be the person who makes everything happen. I still help my family when they need help. But I do it because I want to, not because I've convinced myself that my worth is tied to my usefulness. That roast that was still warm on that September afternoon has become more than just a memory. It's become a symbol of the moment when everything shifted. It's become the marker between who I was and who I became. It's become the moment that I finally said to myself and to my family, I matter too. My presence matters. My needs matter. I deserve to be invited, to be included, to be valued for who I am, not just for what I can do. And more importantly, I finally believed it.